Good afternoon, JR.
What you say, Phil?
Well, I'm loving this weather.
Oh man, isn't this something?
We have got sunshine and 80 degrees.
Yes,
and
yes.
I'm a happy boy.
I worked outside 2 hours, 3 hours yesterday afternoon. Really, just loved it.
JR, we're in a series here called The Signs of Jesus, and we're in the third sign. Today we're going to look at the government official. We don't really know what it was, do we? No. What am I talking about? We're going to look at the fella at the pool at Bethesda.
Right.
America's a culture that can't wait for nothing. You drive along and you hate sitting in traffic. We hate waiting on our online orders to be ready at
DoorDash.
at the restaurant. And we hate. I stand and watch the microwave.
You know, that's something in it.
It is.
That is something, but it's true.
Well,
That's true.
all right. Imagine waiting 38 years for something.
Yeah.
Waiting 38 years, day after day, week after week. This paralyzed man saw no relief.
Yeah.
He sat there at that pool at Bethesda. And we're going to take a look at the detail on this. When he met Jesus, his life changed forever, didn't it? We make assumptions every day. We assume that the car sitting in the left lane is going to turn left. We assumed today that we were getting off the interstate and that this car that was going on down the road was going to go on down the road, and all of a sudden, here they come over.
Cut in front of you.
They decided to cut over, yeah. We also make assumptions how God works. You know, if this happens, God's going to do this. Or if you request something, God's going to act in this way. The thing is, we assume we know how God works. But Jesus paints a far better picture for us and a more accurate picture of how God works in the miracle today. He's in Jerusalem attending a festival. It doesn't really say which one he was attending, but we find Jesus walking by the pool of Bethesda. And it was on the Sabbath day. So that's going to come into play. That pool there, it contained two pools actually, and colonnades. It had roofs over the two pools and one in the center, like two on each side and one through the center. Now, we call them archaeologists have determined that and figured out how that was all laid out.
It's funny for you how John wrote this, and he wrote it in about 90 A.D., several years after this happened, but yet when they dug up, looked, and found these pools, it was exactly the way he wrote it 2,000 years ago.
The pool's name carried some significance. Bethesda means house of mercy. That was the name of it. It was believed there that miracles could happen in those waters. They thought the waters contained healing powers, and whenever they were troubled, they would get in that pool.
Right, try to.
And
But
these
the
crippled
trick
people,
was you had to be the first one in to
well,
get healed.
It's traditional belief.
Yeah.
You know, here's a boy. He'd been there coming 38 years. So we're introduced to this man. He's sitting there. We're not knowing his name or anything, but he'd been disabled for 38 years. I guess he's 38 years old.
Could have been.
But at some point in his life, he'd heard about this pool, and he'd taken to going down there and waiting at the pool for that water to stir. Let's look at the scriptures. This is a good study.
Yes, it is. We're looking at the 5th chapter of John. Now, a lot had happened between the last verses and this verse. We last time we talked you was talking about the man whose son he healed from a far distance. Jesus is now back in Jerusalem again, as you said, to a Jewish festival. There were 3 festivals. I don't remember the names of them, but all Jewish men were supposed to go to Jerusalem every year for these 3 festivals. Jesus went back again, so he hadn't been too long since he was in Jerusalem.
Yeah.
And the last time he was there, he probably got in trouble because he cleaned out the temple. You remember that? He
Yeah.
drove out the money changers
Yeah.
and those folks. So Jesus, the first miracle we studied was about the wedding, changing the wine at the water to the wine in the wedding. And Jesus, at that point in time, said, "My time's not come." He's got over that, hadn't he?
Well, I'm sure he and God had a talk.
He and God had a talk. He said, "Okay, I agree. It is my
Yeah.
time." Because the first time after that he went to Jerusalem, he made a stink in the temple, and that was not well received, I'm sure. And we're going to see what he did this time is not well received either. But he's past the. It's not my time. He knows
Yeah.
God is. It's time for him to move on. So he says in chapter 5 of John, 1-7, after this, a Jewish festival took place, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. By the sheep gate in Jerusalem there is a pool called Bethesda in Aramaic, which has 5 colonnades. Within these lay a large number of disabled, blind, lame, and paralyzed. One man who was there had been disabled for 38 years. When Jesus saw him laying there, he realized that he had already been there for a long time. It said, when Jesus saw him laying there and realized he had already been there for a long time, he said to him, "Do you want to get well?" "Sir," the disabled man answered, "I have no one to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up. But while I'm coming down, someone else goes down ahead of me." You've already laid out a good background of where this takes place. Now, it's really on the outside of the city wall of Jerusalem, and it's overlooking, or when you leave the pools and go down into the Kineret Valley, on the other side of that is the Garden of Gethsemane and the Mount of Olives. So it's on that side of Jerusalem, the outside of the city of Jerusalem, where the Mount of Olives is and Garden of Gethsemane. And those pools were there, and the tradition was that if the water got stirred, and the Jewish people believed it was stirred by an angel, but when they did the digging in the the architects did the digging, or the excavators did the digging later on, they found that those 2 pools were connected by an underground pipe between the 2, and it probably has some kind of gate in it that did keep the water level from one pool to the other. You know how water seeks its level, but it might have even had some kind of floating system in it where the water would get pretty low in one pool before the other water came in, and that's probably what the stirring was, Phil. The Bible doesn't say at all that there was an angel that ever stirred the water, but they did acknowledge that the people believed that they believed it was special healing because of that. And it happened when those stirring of the waters took place.
It says they believed it, but does it say anywhere there why they believed it?
No,
I never did see anywhere
No,
why they would believe that.
Obviously, evidently, at some point in time, somebody thought they were healed by that. I don't know, because it was tradition just to lay there, and this guy had been. We don't know if he's there every day or not, but he'd been there a long time, back and forth to the pool. He had never been the first one to get in. He was blind. He says he was. He says he was paralyzed, or it actually says he was disabled. We don't know if he was paralyzed or blind or lame, but he hadn't been able to get into the water for 38 years, had been disabled. He didn't have any hope of getting healed unless someone was there to put him in. I think, Phil, I think you can read into this that his friends had said, "I've had enough. I've been down here with you for the last months or years, and we can't get there first." And I don't think he had anybody sitting there with him, getting ready to put him in the pool when the waters were stirred. That's what I think, because he says when Jesus asked him the question, first off, he says that Jesus realized he had been there for a long time. How did Jesus know he'd been there for a long time?
Well, he'd been there before.
Yeah, okay.
He probably could have seen him there before.
Yeah, and I think it's probably because of Jesus' knowledge of what's going on around him. I think Jesus looked at him and saw and knew exactly what this man had been going through.
Yeah.
And how that he'd been there all this time. I think because of his supernatural ability to know what's going on around him and all the knowledge, omnipotent knowledge that he has, that he knew exactly who the man was. And
What do you think that man was thinking Jesus would do?
well, I think when he asked him, "Do you want to get well, to be healed?" the man answered him by saying, "No one has put me in the pool." I think he's thinking Jesus is going to sit there and wait with him. That's what I think. But Jesus had different ideas. He didn't.
Or put him in the pool?
That's what. Well, yes. Of course, if you just went in the pool just to get wet, you weren't going to get healed.
Yeah.
Had to be stirred.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think he was either going to put him in the pool or he was going to wait there with him until the waters did get stirred. Was it a pointless question on Jesus' part? What could the man have said?
Well, we really don't know if it was pointless or not. But you know, when I read that scripture, the thing that stuck out at me was that some people like to wallow in their illness.
Okay, yeah.
You know, was he wallowing in his illness? I don't know.
But you'd get awful discouraged after 38 years, Bill.
Yeah, but do you think he was making any big effort to get down to the pool, or have somebody lay him on the edge where he could just roll over in it?
Roll.
You know?
I don't know. A lot of people today in the age would say, "What's the matter with you? Are you crazy? Of course I want to get healed. You know, you're stupid, Jesus." Yes, I want to get healed. But he didn't answer like that. He said, "I haven't been." Really, what he's saying is, "I haven't been healed because no one's here to put me in the pool whenever the waters are stirred."
Yeah.
And as we said, they could have been stirred by natural causes. They could have been stirred by the water just moving and leveling itself from one pool to the other. There was probably a water line coming to those pools from a stream somewhere. And when that stream got bigger, it might have run the water in there. But we see Jesus in Jerusalem for a festival, just outside the city walls. We see a man that's there, has been lame or crippled or disabled for 38 years. And he probably was in great despair. He said, there's no hope. But yet there's, like the man last week, like the ruler that came to Jesus, he said, "You're the one that can do it. You need to go with me and heal my son because I've tried everything else." This man had tried everything else, I'm sure. And he thought the only chance that I have of being healed is for somebody to put me in that water when it's stirred. And he was still holding on to that little bit of hope that he had in his life. Now, we see Jesus seeing him, he actually knows what's going on. And he's, unlike every other person in that man's life, who wasn't willing to sit there with him all the time. Jesus gave him some hope, said, "Do you want to be healed?" And I think he thought either he's going to put him in the water or he's going to wait there with him until stirred. He had a little bit of hope at that point in time.
Yeah.
Of course, he didn't know what Jesus was going to do.
And I think his hope was in what Jesus was going to do.
Yes.
Rather than who Jesus was.
Yes.
Because he didn't know him from anybody.
Jesus hadn't been teaching in very long, probably just a few months, if that long. And so this guy probably didn't know him from, as we say, from Adam. We didn't know him at all. But in the next verses, we're going to see that Jesus goes beyond what we expect. Jesus did more to this man than this man ever expected he could.
Well, this set of verses, I think the guy is very constrained, and he was very patient with his answers.
Yeah, he could have.
I don't know that I would have been.
He could have been very curt when he answered back. To, "What's this guy doing? Ask me if I want to get healed."
Get up, Jesus told him. Pick up your mat and walk. Instantly, the man got well, picked up his mat, and started to walk. Now that day was the Sabbath. And so the Jews said to the man who had been healed, "This is the Sabbath. The law prohibits you from picking up your mat." He replied, "The man who made me well told me, pick up your mat and walk." Now that's what he told them.
Yeah.
But here's what I'm thinking he was thinking. You all been walking by me for 38 years, never raising a finger to help
Never
me.
even looking at me, not even knowing who I am.
I've got legs today that work, no thanks to you. You all would not even set me in the pool of false hope. So, you want to complain about me carrying my mat? That man healed me. He told me to pick up my mat, and I did it.
And I did it.
And I don't recognize your authority over healing. Now that man, oh yeah, I do. Now I think that's what he wanted to say.
Yeah. I'm sure it is.
Jesus ignored his statement about having no help to enter the pool. Really, there's nothing to correct his superstitious thinking.
No.
That was something that had been ingrained in him forever.
It was the only hope he had. He had heard about someone getting healed every time, same
Right,
time. That's
right.
the hope he had.
And debate with him would have been pointless. But he nevertheless was claiming the pool had healing powers. He thought that it could heal him if he got down there at the right time. But we see a command. It's a one-time action. He's not going to have to do this again. Get up. Pick up your mat and walk. It's pretty simple, isn't it? Now, he'd never been able to do that. We know for 38 years
Right.
at least. He had not been able to do it. So why all of a sudden would he get up? He believed. He believed. When he spoke at, he believed him.
Did
What
you?
was it about Jesus that when he spoke something like that, a person would believe it?
Just like I was getting ready to say, the same thing happened to the man last week. The royal man, or whatever, whoever it was, leader, when Jesus said, "Go home, your son is healed." He didn't question it. It had to be something. The look that Jesus had, or the voice, the voice that he used. Of course, we know that back when Jesus was 12 years old and talking to the priest in the temple, they felt a difference in him than any other 12-year-old that had been in there talking to him.
And you can't help but think that there was something special about him telling him
Yes,
that.
yeah,
That it was the very thing that propelled him to do it.
yeah.
His obedient responses showed able-bodied man. He gained these abilities not because of the power in the water, but by Jesus' spoken words. So, as God spoken at all creation, here Jesus spoke at the recreation of this formerly paralyzed man. Now his mat there, we're thinking probably a reed mat or a straw mat.
Yeah.
Something that could be easily rolled up
Yeah.
and packed around by a disabled person, because that's who usually did it. And what they do, they make that mat, and then if somebody need to move them around, they pull them around on that mat. Kind of like at the hospital. If you ever laid in the hospital bed and they put that towel on you,
Yeah.
and they
Scoot you
drag
around.
you up in the
Yeah.
bed. Kind of the same sort of thing. But this was the Sabbath day, JR. Now there's all kinds of rules. All four Gospels highlight the conflict here between, the rules of the Sabbath and the Jewish authorities, their views on what activities were able to be accomplished on the Sabbath day or related to the Sabbath. So there's an escalating tension contributed to these religious authorities and their determination to have Jesus killed. This right here is not going to help any.
No.
This was the Sabbath day. It says John used the Jews or the religious leaders, or something like that, over 60 times in his book. And it can refer simply to followers of Judaism, but John used it to describe the religious leaders.
Right.
That would have been the Sanhedrin and the Sadducees and the Pharisees. So they had a great deal of ire at Jesus for what he had done, not just then, but also in the past. They had heard about the turning over of the tables at the temple, and then here he's coming in and telling this man to get up and walk. Obviously, there wasn't nothing wrong with that man. He'd been faking it all this time.
Yeah.
And this Jesus comes along and tells him he's healed by the very idea. So, our fourth commandment, it prohibits working on the Sabbath. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. It doesn't really define work.
Right.
But this honoring the Sabbath was a big identifying trait for the Jews that other people around would see. They don't hit a lick on the Sabbath day.
No.
They don't even walk across the street much more than, so many steps.
You can walk so many
Yeah,
steps, you're right.
they do that and they rest because God rested when he created earth. So by the time they were done, the Jews wrote more laws in about the Sabbath, and there were 39 different laws written by the time that Jesus was crucified. 39 different laws that governed them on the Sabbath day.
Right.
Ooh, that's a lot. And they passed those down orally, put into writing about AD 100. So it
That's
prohibited moving articles around. You didn't move your furniture across the street. You didn't move your chariot and your horse or your camel, whatever it was
Yeah.
you're riding, your donkey. So a mat was allowed to be carried, but only if it was a disabled person carrying it.
Right.
The person that was with the man would not have been able to carry it. So this man, who was now healed, was violating these oral laws, the tradition, and not only that, but one of the commandments. So I guess they lived in fear of these people because they could put them as an outcast in
Right.
society.
Right.
They could encumber their business dealings. They could do all manners of things to them if they decided to set their sights on them and do it.
Kind of like the Amish do when someone leaves their community. They shun them.
Yeah,
They would not have anything to do with it.
But he didn't call Jesus by name when they asked him, who was this man? He didn't know.
He didn't know who it was.
Now, Jesus will come back later. We'll see. But he couldn't wait to tell him, I did what that man told me to do, did he?
Was he shifting the blame?
I
Like
think
Adam and Eve did? That's they finally said the snake told us to do it.
he's shifting the blame, I think, to cast this dispersion off that
Right.
they had come at him with, because it was pointless.
Yeah.
It was nonsense. They should have been sitting there celebrating in the street
Exactly
with this
right.
guy, what God had done in his life.
What God had done to this, for this man.
But the whole essence of the whole thing is that Jesus went beyond his expectation. He expected him to set him by the pool, and the pool healed him.
Yep.
Jesus healed him by the spoken word and went beyond. Why we often respond to human authority over Christian authority.
We have to be careful, don't we? When we do something that's contrary to God's law, even when we're in one of our laws.
We'll
But
do that. We don't want to be seen as a weirdo or some
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
religious freak or something like that, that somebody could ridicule you. And we're quick
Yeah.
to dodge that
Yeah.
if we can.
yeah,
Let's look at the next scripture.
And we're going to skip verses 12 through 16, but in those, that's when
Yeah.
the Pharisees continued to ask the man questions, and of course he told them who did it. And then we see that the man ran into Jesus and found out who he was. Now we don't know if he went up to him and talked to him, but Jesus, I'm sure, had a crowd around him, and the man knew that was who had healed him, and he found out who he was, and he actually went to the Pharisees and told them who it was. It was a man named Jesus, is what he said, what he told them. Jesus didn't tell him not to tell anybody, and in some cases when Jesus when Jesus performed a miracle, he would say, "Don't say anything about it." In this case, he didn't. He didn't tell the guy not to say anything. But then we get to verse 17. Now, before that, in verse 16, the Pharisees have now come to Jesus. Said, "What are you doing, healing this man on the Sabbath? You know you can't work. You can't do that kind of things on the Sabbath." Jesus responded to them. There were questions to him. "My Father is still working, and I am working also." This is why the Jews began all the more to kill him. Not only was he breaking the Sabbath, but he was even calling God his own Father, making himself equal to God. Jesus replied, "Truly I tell you, the Son is not able to do anything on his own, but only what he sees the Father doing. For whatever the Father does, the Son likewise does these things. For the Father loves the Son and shows him everything he is doing, and he will show him even greater works than these, so that you will be amazed." Jesus comes right back at them, doesn't he? The Pharisees. I call them Pharisees. It was the Jewish leadership's who it was. And Jesus said, "My Father's still working, and I'm working also." But
Oh, blasphemer.
what did he even say? God is his Father.
Yeah.
Now they would sometimes say, "Our Father in heaven," but that was different. Jesus was using Father as a personal pronoun.
right.
This is my Father, my Daddy,
Yeah.
the one who brought me into the world, is still working, and I'm working also. So therefore, I'm going to do what God wants me to do. I'm His Son, and they saw that. That was blasphemy. That now they had two counts on him, Phil. They had the one count of dishonoring the Sabbath, working on the Sabbath, and they had the second count, which is probably even worse, of blaspheming God's name. And the second one, the law said that you would be stoned for that. If you blaspheme the name of God, you could be stoned. So they had two counts that they could kill him again. And to be honest, the blasphemy was the one that when they finally, the time came for Jesus to be crucified, we know that they didn't pick the time. God picked the time. That's what they used, was the blasphemy of God and calling himself the Son of God. That's what got him in the end. John says after they heard these things, they began all the more to kill him. And this is early on in Christ's ministry. I don't know if I realized that probably 2 months into his 3-year ministry, they're already after him. Yeah. And to be honest, the only reason it took that long for them to get it done was because that's when God wanted it done. Mm-hmm. If it'd been there, if they'd had their way, they'd had him killed right after this. But God wanted him to be there and minister for those years and that number of time, and it wanted to be just exactly the right time. So they're after him now, and he said he first off because he was blaspheming the working on the Sabbath, and then because he was making himself equal to God. And then Jesus says in verse 19, "Truly I tell you this," and when Jesus says truly, or he means listen carefully. I got something important to say. The Son is not able to do anything on his own, just what he sees the Father doing. Now the writer makes it clear that Jesus had power, but he was going to do the things that God wanted him to do when he wanted him to do it. He wasn't going to go out on his own and not do what God wanted him to do. We've talked about that the last few weeks about him praying and God leading him. And he says whatever the Father does, the Son likewise does these things. God is in the healing business. God loves people. God takes care of people. God can control things. And Jesus said, "I can do the same things I see my Father doing." Then he said,
Now, what do you think those Pharisees or Sadducees, whatever we had there, Sanhedrin, what do you think they thought when he said that?
well, I think the first thing, like we do sometimes, as soon as he said, my Father, I'm doing what my Father's doing, I'm not sure they heard anything else, because that made them so mad, don't you think?
Yeah.
They just blew up. They might not have said anything, but you can just see him. Oh, what's he doing?
Saying that he could do the same things that his father
Yes,
did.
that made them so mad and upset that they probably didn't hear anything
They
else.
felt like it was on, he's putting himself on equal footing
And
with
with God, yes. And they could not, and you know they couldn't stand that. And they didn't hear anything else, any reasoning he had to say at that point in time.
Yeah.
He said the Father loves the Son and shows him everything he is doing. Jesus knew what God was doing, what God had in store for him, and that God will show greater works so that you will be amazed. And when we think about what Jesus did the rest of his ministry, I mean, these were miracles. But you talk about feeding 5,000 people on one occasion and 3,000 on another occasion. You're talking about raising Lazarus from the dead, raising 2 or 3 other people from the dead. John says in some of his writings that if you wrote everything down Jesus did, you wouldn't have enough books in the world to write it all, to hold it all. He healed all kinds of lame people, blind people, calmed the sea. Those are things that lepers being healed, their skin being cleaned.
Yeah.
Those are things that some greater signs that Jesus said, you're going to be amazed. Now,
Blasphemers.
did they believe all of it? Did they even care?
No, they didn't.
I don't think they cared. They didn't care about that. They had their reasons for his death. For one thing, they knew if he was right, where did their standing in the world go? Down the drain, didn't it? They didn't. Nobody. You wouldn't have to go through somebody to get to God. You could go to God on your own. You go to their purpose in life was in the world was done for.
The other thing that's striking about this is that Jesus sought him out. He didn't seek Jesus out. Jesus sought him out.
Yes.
You want to be healed?
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
As you said, those same people had probably walked by there how many times in their 38 years? They walked right by him and didn't even glance at him. They probably looked away from him so he wouldn't see them. Sometimes we feel when we're going down the road or when we're on the street, walking on the street, and we see somebody that's begging. A lot of times we'll turn our head. We don't want to have our eye caught by him or them or whatever. And that's what they did, I'm sure. Now, we know that God established laws for working on the Sabbath, but the writer puts it like this. Well, that's not where it is. He said God didn't quit working on the Sabbath. He still does things. There are still births that come about on the Sabbath. There are still deaths that come about on the Sabbath. And he says that if God wasn't busy on the Sabbath, that sin would be rampant in the world. I don't know how, but that's what he explains it. But so I don't think God said you can't do anything. You can't do anything other than breathe. But yet we need to make sure we honor the Sabbath for what it is, which is a day of worship to God.
Creation had to be sustained, and still does today. You can't sustain creation on 6 days and not the 7th.
Right.
So there were things that occurred on the Sabbath. They were okay, and they needed to.
But this is just another example of the miracles Jesus performed, and this shows his authority. He has the authority that God gives him. He's able to do the things God does, the things God wants him to do. He's able to do them. And the Jewish leadership are now have 2 reasons why he should be killed, and they begin that process early on in his ministry of shutting him up any way they can.
This is when I played dice with my mother. I'll say, if I win 2 out of 3, I'll say I'm grand champion. And I had her saying it there for a little bit, but now she won't say it. But the fact that she wouldn't say it didn't mean that I wasn't. It's the same way here.
Yeah.
The fact that these religious leaders wouldn't acknowledge who Jesus was,
Right.
and wouldn't acknowledge the things that he was doing,
Doesn't mean he wasn't.
it doesn't mean that he wasn't.
No.
It just means that they didn't recognize it or were refusing to recognize it. So what do we do with this study? Thank God for his authority and power to help us. Take your needs to God. Ask him to give you faith. Ask for the unexpected.
Yeah.
You know, ask for the things that you need, that you want. And God will provide. I think it's important that we recognize God's work, just like those religious leaders refused to accept that he had anything to do with this guy's healing.
Right.
In fact, he caused this man to sin by healing him on the Sabbath. Think of the times that God's acted to meet your needs. Keep a journal. God, just write them down. You know, God helped me do this, or I prayed to God, and here was His answer. You know, He answered that prayer. Write it down so you have a history. Try to get somebody to be your partner, share your need and your prayer for getting this need taken care of.
And we do that, Phil, through our Bible study on Sunday morning.
Sure, absolutely.
We have a group there that is faithful in praying for each other and bringing their concerns and cares to the class as a whole.
And as you join each other in praying, you see God work.
Yeah.
You see Him answer prayers, and it just builds your faith. Imagine waiting 38 years for a miracle. Day after day, week after week, year after year, time passed by, and this paralyzed man just sat there, and he found no relief until Jesus came
Yeah.
and sought him out. And when he did, he responded to Jesus, it changed his life forever. That's what he does with us, Jay.
Mm-hmm.
He works in a way that goes beyond our expectations and fulfills our needs.
Yep.
I hope you enjoyed the study today.
Oh, we did. I did.
We enjoyed bringing it to you.
Yes.
We've got 4 more of these, and,
Yes, we
and
do.
they're all good.
Yes, they are.
So I hope you can join us next week. We'll look forward to seeing you then.